It's race week in Monza. We are back for the second leg of a doubleheader for the Italian Grand Prix. Ferrari and Charles Leclerc surprised us all last year, using the one stop to take home the victory in front of the Tifosi. Will we see a repeat this year with Ferrari red on the top step of the podium? Will the dominance of McLaren continue, or could it be Max and Red Bull? Maybe even Georgia Mercedes giving us another surprise. A McLaren driver has won the last 5 races, but there's a chance we could get a shakeup this weekend. We're about to dive into everything we expect to see at the Italian Grand Prix, all coming up next on the Chicanery Podcast. We are back at the Temple of Speed, the last European race of the season, and it's one of the most historic tracks left on the calendar, and definitely the fastest. We've got a few chicanes, a couple medium speed corners, but other than that, it's very long straights and very high speed corners. Pirelli's sticking with the same tire choice for this weekend that we had for last year's Italian Grand Prix, which are the C3, C4, and C5 tires. So there will be a lot of data to rely on for all of the teams. And because of that, I think the one-stop strategy will be the more favorable strategy. It looks like it'll be a dry, hot weekend too, so expect tire degradation to come into play, especially with all the high-speed sections. If tire deg is high enough, it could push teams into a two-stop, but the time lost in the pit stop is one of the longest of any track. So all of that together, on top of the one-stop strategy being the reason why Leclerc won last year, should incline more teams to go with that strategy call. Things could be a lot tighter than usual this weekend, though. Last year, we had only 0.2 separating the top 6 drivers in qualifying, so we could get a mixed-up grid for Sunday's race. Starting with McLaren, though, it won't be their best track, but they should still be the favorites for this weekend. I wouldn't expect to see a huge gap for the rest of the field like we've seen in Miami, Belgium, Hungary, and plenty of others this season. There are a lot of long straights, and straight line speed is probably McLaren's biggest weakness, if you even want to call it that. But at the same time, they have plenty of room to spare and can afford to lose some performance and still come out on top. But what will things look like for their two drivers after last weekend's results, with Oscar winning the Dutch Grand Prix and Lando losing a massive chunk of points with the DNF? It'll be the first weekend that will really tell us if this championship fight is over or still alive. Lando has 0 room for error. And if he wants to stay in this championship fight, he at least needs a win this weekend. And maybe even some misfortune for Oscar that bumps him down the order too. The good news for Lando, though, is despite that DNF last weekend, it looks like he'll at least avoid a grid drop to start this race. There was a lot of talk about that after the DNF last weekend because it looked like a power unit issue that caused his retirement. And it looked like Lando was going to have to take a new power unit that would have given him a grid penalty for this race. But we learned during the week that it wasn't the power unit and was instead an oil leak caused by the chassis that caused the engine to just shut down during that race. Still a terrible situation for Lando in the midst of this championship battle, but at least somewhat of a silver lining for him. But he needs a dominant performance this weekend, and that starts with qualifying on Saturday. He cannot afford any missteps, and he really needs to be on the front row, especially if Oscar is there too. Monza is a little more forgiving than what we saw last week at the Dutch Grand Prix. Even if Lando starts second and Oscar's on pole, there is still a chance going into the first chicane. And even if Lando loses the lead going into the first chicane, there will still be opportunities later in the race for overtakes. But ideally, he needs to finish that first lap ahead of Oscar. One thing to really watch out for, though, how aggressive will Lando be, especially on the first lap? The first chicane in Monza is notorious for bold moves and even crashes. And even with those papaya rules, what does Lando have to lose? He needs to capitalize, and he needs to capitalize now. But could that lead to another Canada incident? The tough news for Lando, though, is this is a track that should favor Oscar's driving style. I talked about it a little last weekend in the preview episode for the Dutch Grand Prix, but Oscar has the advantage at tracks that use more of the rear suspension, where it's more important to get a good exit out of the corners. And that's what we have here at Monza. So even though they should be close, the odds probably favor Oscar to come out on top. It's the second home race of the year for Ferrari, and the last time they'll enjoy two home races for a while, with Imola getting the boot after this season. Monza is always a really special place for Ferrari. The home crowd here is like no other, and there are very few moments in the sport that top the sea of red fans celebrating a Ferrari win. But to make the weekend even more special, Ferrari is bringing a special livery to the race this weekend. It's inspired by Niki Lauda's first championship winning car from the 1975 season 50 years ago. I have to say, I really like this one. They've disappointed us a lot the last few attempts at a special livery, but this one, very well done. It really mirrors the paint scheme of that 1975 car, other than the ugly HP logo, of course. It's been a tough season for Ferrari, though. The results just have not lived up to the expectations, but at least for this weekend, their chances at a victory should be a lot better, because this track layout really plays to their car's strengths with the long straights, the fast corners, and it's been that way for a while now. They've had both drivers finish in the top four the last three races, and at least one driver finish in the top four the last four. They just know how to get the most out of their car here. And that's good news, because they really need a good result, especially after last weekend's disappointing double DNF. But what it will really come down to is this issue with the car's ride height. Can they figure it out? And can they nail the setup going into qualifying and the race on Sunday? That really is the key for them this weekend, and will be something to watch throughout the free practice sessions. But if they do, and if any Ferrari driver is going to win, it's most likely going to be Charles Leclerc. He won here last year. He feeds off the energy from the home crowd. And outside of a crash in 2020, Charles has never finished outside of the top four since he joined Ferrari. The McLarens are going to be tough to beat, no doubt about that. But I think at least for this weekend, Charles is in the mix as a favorite for the race win. It's a different story for his teammate. There's a lot of pressure on Lewis this weekend, not only because it's a home race, but there's pressure to at least break through with his first Grand Prix podium with the team. Unfortunately for him, it will probably be an uphill battle. He comes into the race with a 5-place grid penalty for speeding under double yellows during the pre-race lap to the grid last weekend in Zandvoort. I saw the video after the fact. It didn't look great. I don't know how fast that was compared to the normal procedure, but it didn't look good as he flew into the pits with all of the team personnel and spectators on the grid. Just a recipe for disaster if he somehow loses the car in that moment. So a tough break for him, but I really don't blame the FIA for bringing the hammer down on him for that. But because of that penalty, qualifying will be a lot more important than usual for Lewis. And to add insult to injury, this hasn't been his best track lately either. He has won this race 5 times, but he hasn't finished on the podium here since 2019. He probably would have in 2021 if that crash with Max never happened, but still, not the streak you expect from a 7-time world champion. I think Lewis will be able to make up the places lost from the grid penalty. But can he get ahead of Max, George, his teammate, the 2 McLaren drivers? Could be too much to ask, which probably won't be the result he or the team is looking for. There was some hope that if there was going to be another challenger for a race win this weekend, it could be Max Verstappen. But unfortunately for him, it doesn't look like he'll be getting any help from Red Bull to achieve that. Last year was a tough race for Max and Red Bull. He only qualified 7th and finished the race 38 seconds off the lead in 6th. After that race, Max blamed the poor performance on Red Bull's lack of a special Monza rear wing compared to the other top teams. And there was some optimism that the team would give him that this year. But now it looks like they won't bring anything, and they'll instead focus more on their low downforce setup. But even that could give us a surprise result, because Red Bull is very strong in the high-speed corners and with their straight-line speed. And we've seen that from them this season at tracks like Silverstone, Suzuka. So even without a special rear wing, I still like Max's chances to mix things up this weekend. But tire degradation will be a big factor to watch for them. It could be the killer, especially if it turns into a one-stop race. It's still a struggle for them. And if the temperatures really heat up on Sunday, could spell trouble. For Yuki, his record really could not be worse at this track. He didn't start the race in 2021 or 2023. He finished P14 in 2022, and he DNF'd last year. Really doesn't get worse than that. This will be the first time Yuki will be racing here for Red Bull instead of the junior team, but that still doesn't guarantee anything. He now has 13 races under his belt for Red Bull this season, and he's only finished in the points 4 times, with his best finish being a P9. Before last weekend, which required a little bit of luck, it had been 7 races since Yuki finished in the points. Red Bull does seem like they're willing to give him more time to figure things out. But at the end of the day, what promise has he shown? Because so far, he looks like another name in the long list of drivers that have been broken by the second Red Bull car and broken by being Max Verstappen's teammate. It's not an easy situation. It's not an easy car to drive. But it has to get better for Yuki, and it doesn't look optimistic for this weekend. For Mercedes, it's another home race for Kimi Antonelli, and hopefully this one goes better than Imola. And it should. Even Kimi admitted after that weekend that he got wrapped up in the off-the-track attention, and he should make the right adjustments to correct that for this weekend. It could be a much better weekend for Mercedes too. They're strong at low downforce tracks, like we saw in Montreal. And they're a lot better this year in the high-speed corners and with their straight-line speed, so they could be a lot more competitive. But on the more pessimistic side of things, the warmer temperatures are not going to do them any favors on Sunday. So it's hard to predict exactly where they'll end up, but it should still be in the points. But their ultimate result will really come down to how well they can manage cooling and how well they can manage their tires. I'm more interested, if anything, to see where Kimi is compared to George. There have been a handful of errors since then that have made the results worse, but Kimi really hasn't finished anywhere close to George since Canada. George is a very experienced driver, and Kimi has a long way to go with his development. So it's unfair to expect these two to really be fighting this season, but you still expect Kimi to show us something every once in a while. But so far this season, George has the head-to-head advantage 15-0 in races and 14-1 in qualifying if you include the sprint races and sprint qualifying. That's awful. We'll see if there's any home magic for the Italian driver, but it's not looking good right now. All right, let's go to the midfield teams. It's another crucial weekend because the race is tight. You'd expect Aston Martin to be a team to watch this weekend because they've been on an absolute tear lately. And we have to give some credit to Lance Stroll. He gets a lot of criticism, and it has been deserved over the years, but he's put in some solid results the last 4 races outside of Spa. In Silverstone, he started 18th, finished 7th. In Hungary, started 6th and finished 7th. And last weekend, he started 19th and finished 7th. Really impressive results for him. It's been even better for Fernando Alonso, who's taken home 22 points over the last 5 race weekends. And these have been really important results for the team. Unfortunately for them, I think it'll be a down weekend. The strength of the Aston Martin car comes at the high downforce tracks, and we have the opposite here. So maybe they can find themselves into the bottom of the top 10, but it could be a stretch. It should be a solid weekend for Williams, though, and hopefully for them, it's both drivers with good results on Sunday. You can tell there's still some lingering frustration from Carlos's side of the garage because of that 10-second penalty last weekend, and you can't really blame him. But he needs to shake it off and move on because they should have the opportunities this weekend. Monza is a track that plays to their strengths with the straight line speed, and they've usually done pretty well here. Their Achilles heel this weekend, though, could be with the tires. Of course, we've seen these issues pop up with them in qualifying, but especially for the race 2 with warmer temperatures and expected tire degradation. And even with that, I think Williams has a really good chance at being the top midfield team this weekend, and they should be able to come away with a decent points haul. Can Racing Bulls keep the momentum going from Isaac Hajar's podium last weekend in Zandvoort? It was a little bit of a surprising result for the team last week because Zandvoort shouldn't have been their best track. So if they are able to come away with a podium there, what is their outlook for this weekend? I'll be surprised if it's another podium, but it should be a solid points finish for the Racing Bulls. They're not the best with straight line speed, so that could hurt them this weekend. But this team has really improved the second half of the season. And after last weekend, you never really know with them. Can Sauber bounce back this weekend? It was a dip in performance last weekend after 6 straight races with one of their drivers finishing in the points. And that could continue this weekend. Sauber's really one of the worst when it comes to straight line speed. And that's just going to be amplified at this track. On the flip side, though, they've been a lot better in the low-speed corners since they brought that upgrade package to Spain, so maybe that evens things out for them. But I still think, even with that, if they want to make it into the points on Sunday, they're probably going to need to take a few risks and roll the dice with strategy. I think it'll be a strong weekend from Haas. They struggled initially to start the season, but ever since they got their full upgrade package in Silverstone, they've been really good at low downforce tracks. And they've improved a lot in the high-speed corners too. Their weakness, though, is going to come in the low-speed corners with the chicane, so the inverse of what we'll see with Sauber. But it should work out a little more favorably for Haas based on this track's layout. It might not be both drivers, but I think at least one of the Haas drivers finishes in the points on Sunday. For Alpine, a special place for both of their drivers is where Pierre Gasly won his only race in F1 back in 2020, and where Franco Colapinto made his F1 debut last year with Williams. They really need a good weekend if they're going to salvage anything this season and make it out of last place in the Constructors. I just don't think they're getting that. Alpine's slow when it comes to straight line speed. They're slow in the high speed corners. They're slow in the low speed corners. So odds are they're going to find themselves at the bottom of the order this weekend, which unfortunately they're more than familiar with. Going to my podium predictions for Sunday, I'm going to go out on a limb with this one. P3, I've got George Russell. P2, Max Verstappen. And P1, winning the home race in front of the Tifosi, I have Charles Leclerc. I know, no McLaren drivers. Am I stupid? I think we're getting another Canada incident between these two. I think Lando gets way too aggressive, most likely going into that first chicane, and both drivers get taken out of the race, which would be devastating for him, having 2 straight DNFs, and you'd have to think the championship fight would really be over at that point. But I think we see a different Lando this weekend, one that's not playing the long game anymore, and one that's willing to take a lot of risks. So with those two out of the picture, it's probably another home victory for the Ferrari fans. They should be really strong here. And with Lewis starting off the weekend with a 5-place grid penalty, it should be Charles coming out on top. After that, I think it'll be very close between Max and George, and we might even get some fireworks between those two too. But I like Max to have the edge. He might not have the better car, but he's the better driver, and I think that'll be enough to put him ahead. But maybe, just maybe, Lewis can sneak back up there and get his first Grand Prix podium as a Ferrari driver. It'll be tough, but if I'm right about the McLaren drivers taking each other out, it'll definitely be possible. And what a sight that would be for the podium celebrations. I want to finish up talking about some of the comments we've gotten from Stefano Domenicali this week about future changes to the sport. Citing a drop in broadcast viewership and an increase in viewership of highlight reels, he suggested more sprint races, reverse grids, getting rid of Friday free practices, and even shortening races to appeal to the younger generation. In my opinion, this would be a huge mistake. More sprint races is one thing. I'm sure some fans wouldn't like it, but we can get through that. But when things start getting gimmicky with reverse grids, getting rid of free practice sessions, and shorter Grand Prix, that's where you risk doing some serious damage to the sport. Look at NASCAR, a great example for this. They were thriving in the 90s, early 2000s. But then they got too gimmicky with the rule changes, and it's completely backfired on them. They went from a full race, where drivers went straight from the green flag to the checkered flag, to a format that broke the race up into stages and awarded points to the first place driver after each stage. They went from the traditional championship format, where a race mattered equally throughout the entire season, to a playoff system where it's actually possible for a driver to win the first 35 races, but someone can win the last race and still come away with the championship. And we saw the ugly side of it last year in NASCAR with a very controversial championship fight. And now, the majority of their fans hate it. They've lost a lot of the traditional fans. The sport's lost a lot of its appeal. And there's an active movement to go back to the old ways and the old format. That's what's at risk here with Formula One. This sport has become popular on its own with the format that's existed for decades. It doesn't need the gimmicks to be successful. And to the younger generation that's more inclined to watch a highlight reel than the actual race, guess what? They're going to do that no matter what you do. It's just how that generation operates. And you see it across all of the sports, not just F1. Blame it on social media. Blame it on being raised with tablets. Blame it on whatever you want. But no matter what you do to the race format, The younger viewers are always going to choose to watch a 2-minute highlight reel opposed to a 30-minute, hour-long, or 2-hour-long race. Formula One is about tradition as much as anything else, and it always has been. And if you take that tradition away, you lose a lot with this sport. All right, that'll do it for today's episode previewing the Italian Grand Prix. We had the wind taken out of our sails a little bit last weekend with Lando's DNF and just what it meant for the championship, but I'm hoping, fingers crossed, this weekend and what we expect to see with the McLaren car, not as competitive as we're used to. I'm hoping that brings some others into play, especially for the race win on Sunday. I will, of course, be back on Sunday with another episode recapping the Grand Prix and everything else we saw this weekend. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening. Till next time.